Welcome back. Today we're looking at Shakespeare's comedy Love's Labour's Lost, a play interested in the way people pursue love and the role that language and communication plays in that pursuit. This play is interesting on a lot of counts. First of all, it seems to be one of Shakespeare's earlier plays, and it's a play that deals a lot with language. It's one of his more heavy on the wordplay and word games. And with a lot of Shakespeare's plays, there are characters from all walks of life. Here, each character from each different station of life seems to be portraying their own ideas about language, communication, and how we interpret a message. You have the four pairs of lovers, and the gentlemen use a lot of flowery language, including a scene of writing sonnets, to try to win over their young ladies. But all that flowery language really never hits the mark. And by the end, they've been somewhat chastened for their showy attempts to win love. They're going to have to learn how to be a little bit more direct and down to earth. Especially Barone, who's known for being witty and clever with his language and somewhat of a mocker. But even by the end, editing one's speech to be more sincere is difficult. This issue of language is mirrored by all of the subplots as well. We have the Spanish braggart Don Armado, who is excessively verbose in his speech. However, his young page boy, Moat, is able to talk logical circles around him, and always twists everything he says into something clever and funny. Costard the clown and Dull the constable create other layers of language. Costard doesn't understand very much, he misuses his words, using malapropisms all the time, while also seeming to repurpose words. When Don Armado gives him a coin calling it a remuneration for a job he's about to do, Costard begins to take the word remuneration and repeat it to himself over and over again, changing its meaning, whereas the constable Dull seems to point out how the more playful you are with language, the less it is understood. We also have Holofernes and Nathaniel, the schoolmaster and the curate, who are excessively fixated in their own knowledge and their ability to use high Latin and clever turns of phrases. However, most of what they say is completely incomprehensible to everyone around them, other than the fact that everything they say sounds like a bad pun. All throughout, we are continually punning and playing with language, while the characters continue to fail to communicate and understand each other. The second fascinating thing about this play is the fact that it is a comedy that doesn't end as a comedy. Just as the comedy is nearing its climax and really getting to that part where it seems like it's going to wrap up in a five-way wedding, everything falls apart. A messenger arrives spontaneously, telling the princess that her father has just died. It cuts all the levity out of the end of the play. And when the four young men who have worked this entire play to try to win these ladies over see that all their love's labors are lost, they try to see what they can salvage. The play ends with a sense of hopefulness that there will be an opportunity in the future, but first the young men have to learn how to keep a promise. They have to learn how to curb their tongues, and they have to learn how to be more direct. Will they succeed in this and get the girls? Well, considering that it took them all of 30 seconds to break their first set of oaths, it's uncertain. It's that uncertainty that makes this play fascinating. Also, as a quick fun tidbit, it's possible that Shakespeare wrote a sequel to this play, called Love's Labour's I. There is at least some historical evidence that a play called Love's Labour's I by Shakespeare did at one point exist, but we no longer have any copies of it. Could it have chronicled a year later, after these four couples get back together? Very possibly. I'm going to make another video soon in which I talk about the noteworthy lost plays of Shakespeare, and I'll talk a little bit more about Love's Labour's I at that point. For now, let's examine the plot of Love's Labour's Lost. Act 1 begins with the King of Navarre, who is setting up an academy with his three friends. They are going to forego all pleasures in life, and they are going to become educated and intelligent young men. And for the next 3 years, they swear all of these very hard ascetic things, including not speaking to women or allowing any of them near the court. Although the Prince, Longueville, and Dumaine readily sign these documents, Barone is a little bit more hesitant. He points out how absolutely ridiculous the constraints are, and how exaggerated they sound. And on top of it, he points out that they're impossible because, after all, a princess and her ladies are coming to the court this very day to talk about a diplomatic issue between Navarre and France. So how are you not going to speak to a woman for 3 years when you're definitely going to have to speak to the Princess of France this very afternoon? They also decide that for entertainment over the next 3 years, they're going to have Don Armado and his page boy, Moat, in their court. Don Armado is this overblown Spaniard who has grandiose thoughts of himself. In fact, they're interrupted by a note from Don Armado and the Constable Dol, who bring Costard to them. Costard was caught in the middle of a rendezvous with a young woman named Jaquinetta by Don Armado, and he sent them a note which is excessively ridiculous. They laugh at the letter and then question Costard. Costard denies that he did anything wrong, playing again with language as we see so often in this play. The king says, "It was proclaimed a year's imprisonment to be taken with a wench." But Costard says, "I was taken with none, sir. I was taken with a damsel." And the king says, "Well, it was proclaimed damsel." And Costard changes and says, "This is no damsel neither, sir. She was a virgin," as though the changing of the word could change the situation. And so he's turned over to Don Armado to spend a week in prison with bread and water. Scene 2, though, cuts to Don Armado, and there we see that he has fallen in love himself with the young woman, Jaquinetta. We get a delightful exchange between him and his page boy Moat, who is constantly playing around with language. Finally, Jaquinetta and Costard are taken to him, and Don Armado confesses his love to Jaquinetta and imprisons Costard. Act 2 begins with the princess and her 3 ladies' maids arriving in Navarre with the attending Lord Boyet. Boyet is a slick-tongued Frenchman who likes to flatter and play around. They send him ahead to check on the situation since they've heard this rumor that women are not allowed in the court of Navarre. While he's gone, they talk about the other lords who are with the King of Navarre. And it turns out that the 3 ladies who are with the princess each know one of the lords and think a whole lot of him, from various encounters in their past. Maria pairs with Longueville, Catherine with Dumaine, and Rosalind with Baronne. When the king comes out of the court to meet them in the field, because he can't bring them into the court, the princess is a little miffed. And although the king and his 4 lords are trying to sweet-talk these ladies, the ladies are not really having it. Especially since they've not even been allowed to enter the court, and he insists they camp instead in the field, so that they will not be forsworn on their oaths. The princess presents a suit from the king her father, in which, based upon a deal made with the King of Navarre's father, either they owe money or they need to yield up Aquitaine. The king says he knows of no such thing, but he's certainly willing to make the deal if they can provide him the proof. However, they don't have the proof here yet, and so they're going to have to hang out until it arrives tomorrow. Interestingly, the play doesn't actually ever resolve what happens with this dispute, and there is some sense that this is a kind of dowry. After the deal must be left unsettled until tomorrow, each of the 4 lords sneak up to Boyet and ask him who the other woman is, and the lords leave with their ladies' names in mind. Then Boyet and the ladies all talk about the men. And Boyet points out that he feels that the King of Navarre is affected by the princess. His face's own margin did quote such amazes that all eyes saw his eyes enchanted with gazes. I'll give you Aquitaine and all that is his, and you give him, for my sake, but one loving kiss. Act 3 begins with Don Armado, who's decided to free Costard instead of keeping him prisoner, so that Costard can bring a love letter from him to Jaquinetta, for which he gives him the remuneration. But just as Costard is wondering at the money he's received for this, in comes Baronne, who also has a letter he'd like delivered. And so he gives a letter to fair Rosaline. And so we discover that Baronne has fallen in love. I mean, it's pretty clear that all 4 of the men have fallen in love. But Baronne, who said he would be the last to be forsworn, seems to be the first one to make his move towards Rosaline. Act 4 begins with the princess who is hunting with her ladies. In comes Costard, who has the letter that he is supposed to deliver to Rosaline. However, of course, he switches it, on accident, with the letter to Jaquinetta. He gives it to the princess to give to Rosaline. Boyet reads it to all of them, and they all laugh over how ridiculous it is. After a series of clever word games and verbal repartees between Boyet and the ladies, Costard heads off to deliver his other letter. We introduce 2 new characters, Holofernes the schoolmaster and the curate Nathaniel, and they both can't get off their obsession with knowledge and language and Latin. Poor Constable Dol is standing there completely misunderstanding everything they say and trying to talk about hunting, whereas they're only obsessed with the Latin names of things. Of course, all the things that they say, unbeknownst to them, are also bawdy puns. They're interrupted, though, when Jaquinetta and Costard enter, who ask the knowledgeable schoolmasters to read the letter. Costard gave Jaquinetta the letter that was intended for Rosaline, but neither of them can read. Nathaniel reads it, finds it is a sonnet, but it is not intended for Jaquinetta at all. It is a letter between Baronne and Rosaline. And oh, does that put Baronne in a bad light, because that means he's broken his oath to the king! They decide they'd better snitch, but first they're going to have a nice dinner. Scene 3 of Act 4 is one of the best scenes in the play. It's definitely one of the most fun to watch. Berone comes in thinking about how he's fallen in love with Rosaline and broken his oath, and how he thought he wouldn't be the last one to fall. But here he is. And oh, how it would be so much easier if everybody else would just mess up too. Then the king comes in, holding a poem he's written. Berone hides and watches, and the king reads his poem to the princess to himself and talks about his misery. Just at that moment, Longueville comes in, and the king quickly hides as well. Berone is watching the whole thing and laughing at it all. Longueville then begins to read his sonnet. And just then, Dumaine shows up, and also does the same thing. So Longueville is hiding watching Dumaine, the king is hiding watching Longueville and Dumaine, and Berone is hiding and watching all of them. And Berone the whole time makes fun of everything. And just as Dumaine finishes confessing to the woods his feelings, Longueville springs up and condemns him for breaking his oath. But at that moment, the king springs up and condemns Longueville for breaking his oath. And then, Berone jumps out and self-righteously condemns them all. After all, he's not going to get caught. Now step I forth to whip hypocrisy. Ah, good my liege, I pray thee, pardon me, good heart. What grace hast thou thus to reprove these worms for loving, that art most in love? Your eyes do make no coaches. In your tears there is no certain princess that appears. You'll not be perjured, 'tis a hateful thing. Tush! None but minstrels like of sonneting. But are you not ashamed? Nay, are you not, all three of you, to be thus much o'ershot? You found his mote, he says to Longueville, the king your mote did see, but I a beam do find in each of thee. Oh, what a scene of foolery have I seen, of sighs, of groans, of sorrow and of teen. Oh me, with what strict patience have I sat to see a king transformed to a gnat, to see great Hercules whipping a jig, and profound Solomon attune to jig, and Nestor play a pushpin with the boys, and critic Timon laugh at idle toys. Where lies thy grief? Oh, tell me, good Dumaine, and gentle Longueville, where lies thy pain? And where my lieges all about the breast are coddle, ho? And just as Berone is laying it in really thick, thinking that he's going to get away with all of this, in come Jaquenet and Costard with the letter that Berone had. And Berone tries to tear it up really quickly before they can read it, but he's exposed. And they find out that he's in love with Rosalind too. They've all broken their oaths, they're all in love, and they're all in trouble. And so Berone, using his quick sense and quick talking, decides to talk them all around into a way of saying, well, you know, it was right for us to break this oath after all. Let's all go get the girls. And so we come to Act 5, which is the real attempt by the four gentlemen to win over these ladies. Act 5 begins in Scene 1, where we see Holofernes and Nathaniel talking about how they have been ordered to put on some kind of performance for the ladies to entertain them. And so with the help of Don Armado, and Dull, and Costard, and Mote, they're going to put on a performance of the 9 worthies, 9 great heroes of the past. Of course, we can already see that this is going to be awful, and it reminds us of a lot of the other play within a play kind of performances that we see in a lot of Shakespeare's works. Think Midsummer Night's Dream. And everything is somewhat on its head. They pick Mote, who's the tiny little page boy, to play Hercules. Act 5, Scene 2 is the big stretch of action. It begins with the princess and the 3 ladies comparing these love notes that they've received, each with a different present, or favor, with a request that the ladies wear these favors. Gloves, a jewel, a necklace. Then Boyette comes in and tells them that he's overheard the young men decide that they're going to come disguised as Muscovites or Russians, and to try to woo each of the ladies. The princess has the brilliant idea that each of the ladies will be veiled, and so they will not show their faces. And then they switch presents, so that the young men will woo the wrong lady, and they can mock them that way, since they feel that the men are mocking them after all. And so the 4 fake Russians come in and try to woo the ladies, but they're wooing all the wrong ones, and they're just getting the cold shoulder. The ladies refuse to dance, as they have all play, and they dismiss the men. And so the men leave in something of a huff, and they take off their costumes. The ladies remove their veils and switch their presents back. And they think the men will probably come back to try to see what happened and see what we'll say now. When the men arrive, the ladies mock the Russians they just spoke to. Finally, the men are cornered and forced to confess, and they say, no, it was us, we were trying to win you over, and we meant everything that we said. The princess finally pins them down and asks if they really meant all the oaths that they swore while they came dressed in those silly costumes. And then she points out that it was not her, but Rosaline he was speaking to, and that all the men had gotten the wrong women. They were wooing the form without actually knowing who they were speaking to. Notice how throughout this entire play we are miswooing. Everything is aimed and goes wrong. Maybe that's mirrored in the whole hunting scene, and the idea of shooting an arrow and shooting it true. The men break all of their oaths in order to try to woo these women over. But their words and their language and even their actions are all misaimed. The men realize they've completely been had. At this point, though, it's time to watch the pageant of the Nine Worthies. And somewhat like the comical play at the end of Midsummer Night's Dream, the lovers mock what they see here. They somewhat harshly pick apart the performances of all of these buffoons and clowns, and add all kinds of puns in to break apart their language. And then the whole thing really disintegrates when Costard claims that Jacquinetta is pregnant with Don Armado's child. Everything is really blowing up. They're about to have a big brawl, except for that Don Armado doesn't want to fight because he's not wearing a shirt. When in comes McCade with a message for the princess, saying that her father is dead. The speech is so short and to the point. After all of this flowery language that the play has been exploring, all of this poetry, all of these grandiose claims with no real substance to them, McCade enters. God save you, madam. The princess said, Welcome, McCade, but that thou interruptest our merriment. McCade says, I am sorry, madam, for the news I bring is heavy in my tongue. The king your father. And the princess says, Dead for my life. McCade says, Even so, my tale is told. It's the entirety of his message. It is so straight and to the point, and it is a message that is conveyed before he even uses the words for it. The princess knows. The king was ill when she left, so it's not a huge surprise, but it is a moment of heartbreak for her. And with all these other messages that have gone completely awry and never gotten through to their recipient, here is a message that hits home and completely changes the course of everything. The king and Barone step forward and ask if the ladies will still promise themselves in pledge. Sure, all of our attempts at wooing have failed up to this point, but we really, really want you still. The princess's reply is, We have received your letters full of love, your favors, the ambassadors of love, and in our maiden council rated them at courtship, pleasant jest, and courtesy, as bombast and as lining to the time. But more devout than this in our respects have we not been, and therefore met your loves, in their own fashion, like merriment. This all seemed like one big long joke. And although all of them thought it was all just a game, the king says, Now, at the latest minute of the hour, grant us your loves. And the princess says, A time methinks too short to make a world without end bargain in. No, no, my lord, your grace is perjured much, full of dear guiltiness, and therefore this, if for my love, as there is no such cause, you will do aught, this shall you do for me. Your oath I will not trust, but go with speed to some forlorn and naked hermitage, remote from all the pleasures of the world, and stay until the 12 celestial signs have brought about the annual reckoning. If this austere and sociable life change not your offer, made in heat of blood, if frosts and fast, hard lodging and thin weeds nip not the gaudy blossoms of your love, but that it bear this trial and last love, then at the expiration of the year come challenge me by these deserts. And by this virgin palm now kissing thine, I will be thine. Until that instant shut my woeful self up in a mourning house, raining the tears of lamentation for the remembrance of my father's death. If this thou do deny, let our hands part, neither entitled in the other's heart. So she doesn't accept his suit, but if he will take 12 months, take the year, and live that austere life that he had claimed he was going to do before, then she'll accept him. Can he do it? Most of the other ladies claim the same thing for their lord. However, between Rosaline and Barone, there's something extra. She asks for one thing more. Instead of closing himself off in an austere life, he is to visit the sick and the needy and the pained, and use his wit and his cleverness to try to make them laugh. Barone says that's impossible. People in those situations don't want to laugh. And she says, well, then maybe it'll teach you to be a little bit more serious about the things that are important. Then if sickly ears, deft with the clamor of their own dear groans, will hear your idle scorns, continue then. and I will have you and that fault withal. But if they will not, throw away that spirit, and I shall find you empty of that fault, right joyful of your reformation. And Barone says, well, befall what will befall, I'll jest a 12-month in a hospital. As the ladies leave, Barone says, our wooing doth not end like an old play. Jack hath not Jill, these ladies' courtesy might well have made our sport a comedy. The king says, come, sir, it wants a 12-month and a day, and then 'twill end. And Barone says, that's too long for a play. There's almost this sort of understanding of this as a comedy, as a play, but one that is aborted, one that has gone wrong at the last minute. And it's the idea of death coming in that overshadows all of this. At the beginning, the king talked about death as adding gravity and meaning to life, and they're going to die to the pleasures of life in order to really, truly gain great things. And here again, it is death that sombers and changes the lens of everything we've been looking at up to this point. Armado also decides to go into a kind of penance for Jacquinetta, and we end with a song. The song was supposed to be part of the performance that got interrupted. And it's about the seasons. Spring and winter each sing a part, and they both sing about a bird, the cuckoo and the owl. Although spring is associated with love, the cuckoo reminds the lover of infidelity, and there's a deep sense of uncertainty in the first section. Winter, on the other hand, is associated with death, and although that part of the song talks about hardship and difficulty, it's more sincere and even maybe more hopeful. I highly recommend finding a performance of this, because this one's so much better when you actually watch it unfold. All the language games are delightful, all of the fun that comes from all of the clowning around in this play is really, really great. If you can find a copy of the 2009 performance at the Globe, it's absolutely magical. Thanks for watching. We'll continue next time with Pericles, Prince of Tyre. Until then, keep enjoying the Shakespeare. And if you write me love notes, make sure that you mean them. I'll see you later.